have it preserved. Okay,
Okay.
fire away.
So basically, I came up with two ideas. I'm gonna
Yep.
just pitch my first idea that I think has a bit more, how do you call this? Meat on the bone. That's not what you say, but whatever.
But Jocelyn, you just made exactly the terrible mistake that I made when I was talking to all these climate change activists when we were putting the film together. And I described a good idea as the idea has to have a lot of meat. And they all looked at me, and suddenly I realized they were all vegans. And the idea of meat being good was like anathema. So I went in instead with the idea of juice, an
Okay.
idea with a lot of juice, which seemed to be a lot more sort of acceptable. But anyway, we're all
Okay.
meat eaters, I think, anyway, aren't we? So
Yeah.
it can have meat on the bone if you like, or juice, whatever you like. Yes.
So the idea comes from a TikTok that
Hey,
I've seen.
love it already.
It's
Yes.
the Check Your Privilege challenge. And basically, what I was thinking of was an interactive film where you answer questions for yourself. Like personally, you first have your test of who you are as a person, asking, do you live in a house? It's very basic. Do you live in a house? Do you live with are your parents divorced or are they still together? And all of that. Where do you come from, or where do your parents come from? Do you have any disabilities whatsoever? So the whole test is basically to show people how privileged they are or how unprivileged they are, unfortunately, but mainly to show people that there's a lot of points that fall into this that we don't think about or never discuss. That, for example, if your parents do not have a university degree, you're automatically less privileged than someone who comes from an academic background. Things that people, I don't know, it's something that I've realized in Switzerland that they don't talk about, they don't discuss this, but it's just quite a lot harder to academically succeed if your parents are not academically successful in that sense. So that was my first idea that I had.
Okay, but what's your idea? So this is the privilege TikTok challenge, and so just so we're up to speed, um, can we like what actually happens in a TikTok in a check your privilege challenge?
In the TikTok itself, it's basically a voiceover where you have to put your fingers up and they say put your fingers down if you have ever um, received racial slurs, and then you put a finger down, and
So
depending on
basically,
how many
so it's a
fingers
game of
they,
never have I ever, basically.
exactly. Um,
Okay,
but in the
is everyone familiar with this?
Hmm.
Albert, Albert's not. I'm not. So can we? Do you mind if I do a share screen and let's have a look at one? There's one on YouTube. Or
Yes,
do you want to share one, Jocelyn? If you've
no,
got
that's
one ready
fine.
to
The one
go.
on YouTube is the one that I meant.
Okay. So let's have a little look so we all know what Jocelyn saw. So this one.
I can't see. It's loading, I think. Yes, exactly.
Okay. So this is 3 minutes 15. Um, okay, off we go.
Put a finger down if you have been called a racial slur. Put a finger down if you've been followed in a store unnecessarily. Put a finger down if someone has crossed the street to avoid passing you. Put a finger down if you've had someone clench their purse in an elevator with you. Put a finger down if you've had someone step off of an elevator to keep from riding with you.
I literally was in my car, as you can see from the video, and I grabbed a pen and a paper, and so I'll just post it online and encourage people to do it as well, so that we can all like compare our experiences.
Any fingers left? That's privilege.
I get this question all the time. Well, that's the way the elevators work. How would you know somebody was because of you? And I say this all the time. If you have experienced it, you know. And so to see thousands of videos with other people saying, yep, I've had somebody step off an elevator to keep a ride with me. You know, it's an avoidance factor. There's different levels of discrimination. And I wanted people that had not experienced it themselves to also consider had they done it. You know, and if you had done it, look at how you're making somebody feel about it. Look at, you know, how you are not being open to just relating to this other person as if they are human.
Put a finger down if you've been accused of not being able to afford something expensive. Put a finger down if you have had fear in your heart when being stopped by the police. Put a finger down if you've given a pass on a citation that you deserved. Put a finger down if you have been stopped or detained by police for no valid reason. Put a finger down if you have been denied service solely because of the color of your skin. Put a finger down if you have been bullied solely because of your race. Put a finger down if you have been denied service solely because of the color of your skin.
I mean, I've had younger kids, you know, I've learned more from you than I've learned from my parents. So you're literally like contradicting the things that I've been brought up with. And that's what we need to do. That's the key. Like, we have to reprogram the way we have been brought up, the way we have been raised. Sometimes you gotta just open a book, shoot, Google, anything. Like, go online, have your own experiences, go out there and meet people, you know, socialize and stuff like that, and you'll start to learn something different. Take the privilege that you have and uplift your neighbor. You just need to get back to having some level of empathy and compassion for people and get out of our bubbles.
Any fingers left? That's privilege.
Okay, great. Okay, fantastic. So, thank you for that. And so, what's your idea based on that, Jocelyn?
So basically, I would make it less about the white privilege. I would make it more about the privilege of being able and living in Europe, because I think there's a massively big difference from what we've seen in the United States and here, like living here. I feel like there's a lot of racial issues that do not get addressed accordingly because it's an American issue, like most of the time. But racial issues don't get addressed. And from the country that I'm from, in Switzerland, there is no such discussion ever about your skin color. They rather say we're colorblind than talking about the actual issue that there is discrimination and racism. But I would also want to discuss other aspects, as, for example, people who can't read, who never learned how to read and came into a social construct and just kind of know how to survive, but they never seek help in order to do so, in order to relearn it. And my idea was basically that there's a check your privilege test in the beginning where people do it themselves, whether that's in a classroom or online at home. And then if they're in a classroom, you obviously, now it's a bit difficult because you can't really make big groups and have big groups, but in a classroom,
You can have groups online.
you can have groups online, exactly. You can put groups together of people that, for example, have parents with two parents with two academic backgrounds, or people together that do not have parents with academic background, and let them discuss in that sense, but also have aspects from, I don't like to say third world countries because I don't agree with that, but have
developing world. Or,
have
well,
video.
I mean, the global south is what Extinction Rebellion calls it.
Yeah.
Global south. Yeah.
I would like to have different aspects and videos of countries where people, for example, have a lower academic background and whatsoever, and how, for example, women live in, I don't know, just a random country, how women get treated and live in another country than in Europe. So getting the focus pulled back to less Eurocentric views, basically.
Okay. And what's the? Oh, that sounds great. And but what's the interactive mechanism? Is it the same because obviously this woman's idea is genius in its simplicity. It's sort of, it is interactive just in the sense of just withdrawing your fingers as you go along, which is a brilliant idea for an interaction. Absolutely brilliant. So would you use that, but it's in a classroom setting, or how would you make it work?
I would use it in a classroom, like in a group setting. I don't know. We used to have this app in high school where you were able to vote, and then you fell out of the rounds. It was like a quiz, but it wasn't a quiz, so you could vote for your opinion. So if it's the check your privilege question coming up after seeing like a documentary part of it, or before, depending on how you want to create this, everyone in the classroom will basically vote for yes, I am white, or no, I'm not white. Like basic questions. And depending on, it's like a race, depending on where the questions are going, you have more or less points. And the more points you have, the more privileged you are, and the less points you have, or vice versa. So that was
so it becomes like a sort of a race between all the kids in a class, or young people in the class.
Yes.
And so you're seeing, it's like a race that you don't really want to win.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. What do the rest of us think of that? I think one question, Jocelyn, is whether how the young people who won the race would feel about that. Because I think, as you say, there's an interesting, we're in an interesting cultural moment where sort of African American, the Black Lives Matter movement has kind of had this huge global impact. And as you say, African Americans have one particular cultural experience, and that the danger is that just then gets kind of pasted on the whole of the rest of the world when different countries have different experiences. So just off the top of my head, I mean, I think one possible risk is that my guess is that one thing is with TikTok, with the TikTok challenge, individuals are choosing to do it. So one interesting difference with what you're proposing is that the teacher is kind of not forcing it on, but let's say the teacher says, okay, class, today we're going to do Jocelyn's privilege challenge. So all the kids have got to do that. So I might not feel at all happy about, let's say, especially since you've got such interesting examples of privilege, which are much more complex. And there's also a more risk that people might really be ashamed of it and might not want it sort of broadcast.
Yeah.
So the thing is that with African Americans, I sincerely hope there would be very few of African Americans who would be ashamed of being African American. So they're not going to feel embarrassed if they have to keep on putting their fingers down.
Yeah.
That's not a source of embarrassment for them personally. On the contrary, it's a source of, anger, proud, and sort of, look, you guys, at what I've got to put up with that you didn't understand.
Yeah.
Whereas with your very interesting challenge, one possible issue there is that if my parents have both not gone to university, then maybe I'm embarrassed about that, and maybe I don't want the other kids in my class to know about it. So that would be one tricky thing there. But the idea of privilege checking, and especially the idea of, whereas your slightly different idea, because correct me if I'm wrong, but in a sense you've got a number of different ways that this could go, right? Which is great, which is always. So you had one idea which was more about sort of individual privilege or racial privilege, especially, say, maybe in a Swiss context or obviously other European countries' context. And then you also had this idea of kind of us as people in the global north who have all these luxuries that we sort of take for granted.
Yeah.
So there, the embarrassment problem doesn't apply. So there, everyone can say, put a finger down if you've ever lived in a house with no running water, say,
Yeah.
or put your finger, So you could have various things about, which are about living as a person in the developed world, and so then that everyone's all in the same sort of boat kind of thing.
Yeah.
The only thing that I would say back though again is, have you ever lived in the global south?
No.
So I lived in Indonesia for 6 years, and I think the tricky thing is that there are good things about living in Indonesia. I'm not an Indonesian peasant, as you may possibly have realized, but there are great things about being an Indonesian peasant, which Westerners don't get. And that there's this kind of vibrant community. There's this kind of incredible sort of group thing that they have, which is very strong, and which is in a sense because they don't have big houses with strong walls and lockable doors. They're all kind of in it together in a way. But anyway, we digress. So that would just be my only thought about. I mean, I love your idea about the, showing us how privileged we are, all of us living in the global north. But the only thing I would say for you to consider is just the amount of laughter you hear in Jakarta, just routinely, is amazing. Yes, they're poor, but they just laugh a lot. And if having a laugh is a kind of global human barometer of well-being, they do that really a lot. But anyway, that's a slightly other question. But that's a very interesting idea. And so if it was done in a classroom, would it be the fingers mechanism? Or they work. Everyone's got them. Though, of course, that's when people start saying, "You heartless bastard." Haven't you seen the number of fingers I've got? Which does happen, of course. But was it fingers, or you're thinking something more with the app?
I was thinking more with the app, but it would obviously also work with just fingers. If it's 10, it doesn't have to be 10 questions, but if it's 10 questions, it can also be done with fingers. I just think with the app, you have the possibility to anonymously submit your answer, and that's where you can prevent people being embarrassed about themselves, but you can still see the statistics of your class. You can still see and kind of start a discussion within the class of how people who are less privileged might feel in that context and people who are more privileged might feel. And there are a lot of very privileged people that are not aware of how privileged they are. And I think even this in a context could be embarrassing for some if their name is on the tag. If they're like, if they won the race in the sense that they're the more privileged person in the class. So I think even that can be embarrassing. But then again, I think embarrassment and being uncomfortable leads to a lot of leads to a good discussion, because this is when people talk and try to defend themselves, but also learn how to understand others.
Yes, absolutely. And certainly if the aim is to get people out of their comfort zone, get people to be honest, and say what they really think or what their life experience has really been, then that's a great mechanism to do that. Yeah, great. Okay, fantastic. So I know you've got another idea, but let's just hold that for a second.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Small idea, so it's not that important. If you have time, it's just a small idea, so whenever we.
And that's when you make us all burst into tears with how beautiful your small idea is. Okay, who's next? Jack?
Yeah, I'll go.
Yep.
So this idea came about because, especially with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, I wanted to kind of show, when my idea was kind of like, I wanted to do, the CPR session that we did last week. I wanted to do something kind of similar to that, but through the lens of what it's like to be a police officer. So
Interesting. Okay.
where you kind of take a similar aspect of you're in control of a police officer's actions, and those actions will have different consequences depending on which one you choose.
Right.
So, like,
Right.
say you choose, for example, if you go after a certain person because you don't want to discriminate another person, but the person you let go is actually the criminal, just to make those sort of split decision choices, just so that people can understand how mentally draining it is on officers out there.
Okay, great. Yes, you could have, you're in a car with your girlfriend and she says that she's revealed your affair to your wife, and you got the choice: strangle her or not. And you decide strangle her, and then you only get, how that guy got off murder for strangling his girlfriend, I have no idea. How can that possibly be manslaughter? I mean, how can you manslaughter someone by strangling them? Anyway, I just put my hands around her neck, and then accidentally she died.
I don't too much strength on, yeah.
Anyway, but sorry, but seriously, so that's an interesting point. I mean, and certainly you would find it very easy to have all sorts of dilemmas. And yeah, I mean, it's a crisis simulator. So it's an interesting variation on hero on a mission. So it's a hero on a mission, but lots of people don't think you're a hero, and also your behavior you've got two layers of decision, right? You've got the layer of what will get the job done, but then so there's another layer of following procedure and so on. I mean, if you were interested in pursuing that, I would have a look. I would try to research the actual Metropolitan Police procedures for dealing with things, because they've actually done a pretty good job, and you know that obviously the police in the UK are by no means perfect, but they have certainly avoided these kind of horrific, high-profile murders that seem to just keep on happening in America. On the other hand, criminals are much less likely to have guns, but still. But there is the Metropolitan Police, I haven't looked at it in much detail, but I looked at it once. It's just interesting because their thing is all about de-escalation. That's the key thing. Let's just all relax. Now, of course, from a drama point of view, that's not really what you want, right? You want like maximum pump it up. But it's all about, okay, we're just going to make this as we're just going to try and take all the adrenaline out of the situation, and we're just trying to be very calm and very relaxed, and no one's going to get hurt, and no one's going to chase anyone, and we're all just going to be calm and keep calm and carry on. And it's in that sense it's admirable, because obviously it results in far less people getting killed than the American way, which, as we've seen, is far more kind of action hero. And also, of course, the thing is that far more American police are ex-military. So what they're doing so often is they're applying military ways of doing things to a police situation. So that's fascinating. I mean, so maybe what you could also do is you could have a bit more fun with the wrong way to do things.
Yeah.
So you could have a situation, and you could have, okay, first let's deal with this like an action hero. First let's deal with this like, Dirty Harry would deal with this. Maybe Dirty Harry would be a bit extreme, like Sylvester Stallone or someone like that.
Yeah.
An action movie way of dealing with it. And of course, it sounds ridiculous, but then of course, plenty of police do think that like that because they grew up with action films with the police as heroes, and So then you could try it like an action hero, and then you could try it like a trained police officer in the UK or some other country, and then you could see it's exactly the same situation. First, you do it like an action hero, someone gets killed. Then you do it like a trained police officer, and you see no one gets killed. It's not as exciting. It's not as fast paced.
More proficient.
But it does the job, and no one gets killed.
Yeah, exactly.
And that would be an interesting. Yeah, that would be really interesting. Yeah, fascinating. I mean, I've just as a aside, some people are trying to talk to me about doing a suicide prevention thing for American police, because police suicide is always a problem, but it's like just going through the roof at the moment because of the extra strains. Yeah, no, very interesting. Okay, thanks, Jack. Who's next? Albert. Sort of. Oh fuck it. Okay then.
It was a short.
Okay. Go for it.
So weirdly, you actually brought up what my idea was, which was a suicide prevention thing, but not for police, just in general.
Okay.
So in my mind, I was thinking it could sort of be in two parts, I guess, with the first part being similar to the environmental video, going through some of the facts and like numbers of people, suicide rates in developed countries and stuff, and then going through like the causes, or not causes, but a lot of the reasons that relate around that and stuff like that, just the factual stuff with the choices, and then what can be like done, I guess, from like our side, not our side, but what can be done to help prevent people who have suicidal thoughts and stuff, and also identifying those thoughts, because obviously that's where most people are lost, is that it's just not seen. So that was like the key idea, and then potentially I was thinking in the second half it would be like the life-saving video with like a scenario based thing, and having like a sort of scenario where you're trying to identify the signs, I guess. And yeah, that was basically the idea.
And that's what we're doing in not next session, but session after.
I didn't.
So we're doing. So I've done a film called Real Talk About Suicide, which is basically it's like Lifesaver, but for suicide prevention.
Right.
However, it's interesting because we don't exactly have. I mean, let's come back to your interesting idea, because once you've seen it, because we don't exactly have a thing of how do you identify a suicidal idea. It's a story, and it's like a conversation between two guys. One of them's feeling suicidal, the other one's trying to help, and you're controlling the one who's trying to help, and you try and turn him round. So we have this thing at the beginning where he says a couple of things, and those just kind of make the you character think, oh, that's odd, and then he asks more about that. What we don't have at all is your very interesting first idea, which is something which is more like which is not a kind of crisis simulator thing where you're doing it. It's, your first idea is very interesting, just sort of discussing suicide as a whole, and, as an issue, and how horrendously common it is, and that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting idea, because it's, an incredibly important topic. And it's, it's also very mysterious. So in a sense, Jocelyn, it's one of the things that when we were making this suicide film, I don't want to talk about it too much because we're going to get onto it. But one thing that we were saying was, well, shall we make it that he's lost his job? Because that's an obvious reason for someone to get depressed, right? And the suicide expert said, no, don't do that, because suicide's not like that. That, take the example of Tony Scott. Who's heard of Jacob? You've heard of Tony Scott? Do you want to just tell us about Tony Scott?
Well, he was the brother of Ridley Scott, wasn't he? I don't know if he was a screenwriter for a lot of his films.
No, he's a director.
He was a director on his own. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But
and
all I know is basically that he killed himself.
Yeah. But I mean, this guy's incredibly successful. This guy directed Top Gun. He directed what's the first film that Quentin Tarantino scripted?
Oh God.
I've got 4 screenwriters here. One of you must know. Don't Google it, Jack. You said True Romance?
Yeah, True Romance. Yeah.
I can't believe that I'm the person who said anyway. So True Romance, which is interesting. If you want to see a Quentin Tarantino film not directed by Quentin Tarantino, have a look at True Romance. It's directed by Tony Scott. Anyway, this guy was multi-millionaire, super successful director. I mean, maybe not quite as sort of art house famous as his brother, but ridiculously successful, gorgeous wife, charming sons, blah blah blah, and he jumped off a bridge and killed himself. And so that's one of the things about suicide, is that it is very mysterious, and it's that there are all sorts of, that often it happens that people who are extremely privileged.
Was the reason for death ever specified? The reason why he killed himself?
No. I was talking to someone who sort of indirectly knew him, and no one has any idea. There's no, so it's just he was suicidal. He felt suicidal. He just didn't want to live. That was it. There was no secret, oh, actually he was very sick, or actually he had a huge debt, or actually he was something like that. There was no secret. He was an incredibly successful guy with everything to live for, and he jumped off a bridge. So, and that's the nature of suicide. But anyway, we'll be talking more about that later. But yeah, okay, great. And it's certainly a topic that is incredibly important and is horrifically, important. And the number 1 cause of death for people under the age of 35, male and female, in the UK is suicide. I hope you like that elegant little sun in, sun out, and I was just completely focused, right? I was like a human computer. Anyway, so it's a super important topic, and will be great to talk about. But let's come back to that in a couple of weeks, Albert, because I liked your idea so much that I went away and made it, and I'll show it to you in 2 weeks, and then you can say, oh, that's rubbish. Oh, it could be so much better. Yeah. Okay, so Jacob, astound us.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I struggled quite a lot to find a subject matter and a form of interactive medium at first, but I think it was 20 minutes ago that I came to the conclusion, or somewhere around 20 minutes before we started. And it came from this idea for a TV series that I've had for a long time, but that I knew, I've always known could be quite, that people could react to it in a bad way. I've been continuously working with it and consulting people about it because I find it to be important, and I'm passionate about the subject matter as well. And it's connected to what I'm about to bring up as well, because I don't know if you heard about what happened last week with this French teacher, this teacher in France.
Oh, right. Who was beheaded.
who was beheaded
Yep.
for showing a depiction of Muhammad,
Yes.
prophet, in class,
Yes.
in order to give context to the Charlie Hebdo things. And it has like started a complete, like, the whole conflict between like the Muslim majority in France and like France itself. Like the whole thing is just like gone into haywire again. And so I was thinking about, what if you could make a film that would emphasize that the discussion that this French teacher tried to bring up, like, you don't know this, like, I don't know the specifics of what he did. All I know is that beforehand he warned like his class to, like, if you were to be feeling offended about this, you're allowed to leave the classroom, and it won't affect in any way your grade or something like that if you get out of class for today, or right before I'm about to show it. And I think that is sort of what I want to get to as well, that through this film I would like to create, like, emphasize that the discussion that he might have tried to bring up is more important than ever, because it needs to be a discussion rather than a conflict, and sort of how you should not confuse a disagreement with conflict, as an example. And through that as well, you could, for an example, in the same manner of which you show the video now with the environment and the 4-part video, I was thinking of something similar, where you have like questions, as an example, where you can have like, is the depiction of Muhammad the Prophet, is it freedom of speech, or is it hate speech, or is it something in between? And everybody in class or this group could select, but it would be, I don't know, buttons of some kind that would indicate that you could like vote anonymously as well, because I think that the discussion that would be afterwards, people would be more considerate perhaps with their words, rather than if everybody saw what everyone voted, you could say. And also, again, to like yet again give context to why are we here now, what is the historical context of this, like explore things such as Orientalism, and how the majority of like conflicts that are religious in both like Central Asia and Middle East are actually geographical conflicts, and those stem from like old colonial Britain, who just like left and made like borders, you could say, and then just left it like that. And yeah, that's it's quite a bit loose, but it's like.
And Jacob, sorry, you said this was related to an idea for a series that you've.
Yeah, it's related to, it's basically an idea that I have about where basically two siblings, one being Muslim and one being ex-Muslim, they come up with the idea of making a video game about Muhammad the Prophet, but that is set in first-person mode, so that they would like sort of get away with the depiction of him. Like you would play as the Prophet, but you wouldn't actually see the person that you were playing in that sort of sense. Which is what there was a Muslim filmmaker in the 70s who tried to do that as well, or actually he actually did it, where the camera was Muhammad the Prophet and his followers spoke into the camera, to the protagonist, right to the audience. And I find that very.
And how was the film received?
Well, the problem was because it was made with both an American and an Arabic cast, and for the American poster they had Anthony Quaid as one of the followers to Muhammad, but he was on the poster, so people thought that Anthony Quaid was playing Muhammad the Prophet. There was a big misstep in the marketing, which led to super controversial. It became controversy.
Okay.
In of itself, and it was a controversy beforehand as well. And also, yeah.
And sorry, may I ask your own religious background?
I would consider myself to be, what do you call it? I always forget it. Not an atheist, but
agnostic.
Agnostic. Thank you. Yeah.
Right.
Agnostic.
Okay. Cool. And sorry, I think you said that your series idea was unpopular or something.
Sorry?
Did you say your series idea was unpopular?
No, I wouldn't say unpopular at all, but whenever it gets brought up, or a lot of times when it's been brought up, it's been both a question of me as a creator being agnostic, obviously, which I understand as well, which is why I want to research it further, which I have as well, both with books and with people to talk about it with, who are relevant, I feel. But yeah, also because of the whole, like, because it is a sensitive subject matter, then people, I should.
Sure. Okay. And sorry, Jacob, just so I'm not presuming anything, your family background, are your family Muslim or?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, yeah, I mean, people have been killed for that sort of idea. Is the only thing I would say. I mean, it would be, I think if you're interested in exploring that topic, then the first thing to do is, I would say you would just need to be, well, it would be incredibly difficult for you to do anything with it, basically. But if you insisted, if you were absolutely determined, then the first thing to do would be to find some Muslim people and sort of create this project with them in a collaborative, cooperative way. So the example is, as I said, I'm not an environmentalist, but I directed that film. Sort of, I co-wrote the script with them, with a group with people who were environmentalists. Now, people are not having their heads cut off for being non-environmentalist, or being rude, for disrespecting the beliefs of environmentalists. But so it's not as sensitive. But that would be, I would definitely suggest something like that, because because you say something even as simple as, we have two brothers, one is a Muslim, one is an ex-Muslim. Well, if someone is ex-Muslim, from the point of view of a serious believer, that puts them in an extremely dangerous, difficult state. So just even something as basic as that, you're already got so many red flags and red flashing lights and all that sort of thing. But if you talk to some, if you have some friends who are Muslim and you talk to them about it, and it's all sort of created collaboratively, then cool. I mean, but even something, the idea of a first-person point of view through the ideas of the prophet, through the eyes of the Prophet Muhammad. You see, technically you're not depicting him, though, hands and so on, but also you're saying that you're inside the mind of the Prophet. And that is like an incredibly dangerous place to be. I mean, forget the idea of like physical risk, but just in terms of risk of, gravely insulting people who might be highly peace-loving and not wish to do anything physical. But, that, as we were saying last time, with those little CPR films, we're filming through the eyes and we're filming the face, and through the eyes and filming the face. Well, if you're filming through the eyes, then you are that person. And that is, to imply that you could be the Prophet Muhammad is a very, would for many people be an incredibly insulting thing. But if there's a topic that you are interested in exploring, great. But I would suggest just put away your creative ideas for the moment. Just go and talk to some Muslim people, talk to them about it, say you want something that increases understanding, and take from there. But there is, it is a very hard problem culturally, because there is a fundamental, you can talk about, oh, well, there's the heritage of colonialism and the Sykes-Picot Treaty or something, where France and Britain sort of divided up, the Ottoman Empire, and, colonialism and yada, yada, yada.
Also, like,
But,
the idea as well, which is not a bad idea as well. It's just in order to prevent any depiction of idols, basically. That's the original idea behind it.
Yes. Sure. Yeah, it's just super complex, and I think, yeah. So I mean, good on you for wanting to deal with such an incredibly important and difficult topic. Have a nice life doing it. It's, yeah. I mean, the thing is that, as we're saying at the moment, everything's political, and anything like that is like explosively political. What you need to be is to be a member of a collaborative group, and you are listening and responding. And so, to give you an example, so at the moment I'm doing a thing which is coronavirus information for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people. Why am I doing such a thing? Well, because I know a lot about sort of communicating medical stuff, but my first job is to shut up and to just listen and hear what they're saying, so that I can put my little bit of expertise in to serve them as most effectively as possible. And something like that, great. But, in terms of freedom of speech is a very challenged idea at the moment. And yeah, but it's the tricky thing is that what we were trying to do in the environment, in the film you saw, is to have friendly discussions. Have discussions where people could have different opinions, but they wouldn't hate each other for having different opinions. And in a sense, that's one reason why I wanted to do something about environmentalism, because you can have those discussions. You can disagree about, do you want a technocratic approach or a social justice approach, or do you want a combination? Those are quite difficult positions, but no one's going to really freak out about, and that's one reason why I chose that topic, because you could have respectful, pleasant difference of opinion. You could all be friends, but not agree. And I think the problem with the topic that you're choosing, and I admire you for choosing it, and it's an important topic, is that that obviously one particular bit of that, there is no grey area, and it's incredibly difficult for people to differ but still listen respectfully to the other guy's point of view. But it's a super important topic, so great to try and deal with it. It's just ridiculously difficult. And also, at the moment, the identity of the author is very important for all sorts of things. So if that script came out, or that, a key, if you were Muslim, people would take your script and your film in a different way. And you might say, but that's unfair, just because I don't happen to be born like that. But that's the reality of how it is at the moment, obviously. Again, that's another reason, environmentalism, people don't ask that question. Was this directed by an environmentalist? No one cares. But anything to do with, questions of ethnicity, or some questions of gender, the identity of the author is really important. And if you don't have an identity which kind of entitles you in the minds of many critics to comment on that topic, you're just gonna never get there. Basically, it's just going to be too difficult in the current climate, I would say. Yeah. So, is there anything else you want to is there anything less hard that you want to?
But that was basically the idea of it as well. The fact that it would not be me who made it, but sort of in the essence of how you made it. That
it's a collaborative thing. Okay, so let's say that. So how does it work? So let's say we get the idea. We all love the idea. How does it actually operate?
And like I said before as well, I think in order to perhaps avoid this sort of very confrontative discussion that could occur between people in a classroom or a group or whatever it would be that would be subject to this film, it would be that people vote anonymously for these different questions that would arise. And then afterwards, there could be, like, once you see the results of that, like in a percentage way, you could perhaps have a discussion where people, this is just like a guess, my psychological guess, but my guess is that perhaps people would be more considerate with their words because there wouldn't be this, like, you wouldn't have to defend yourself per se, perhaps, rather than would be just presenting yourself, if that makes any sense.
Sorry, why would they be more considerate with their words? Because they were anonymous.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the fact as well, the fact that no one will see what you have voted for. So it would. So
I mean, I slightly doubt that, to be perfectly honest. Certainly if you look at what happens online, is anonymity, people just go nuts. People can just say especially when it comes into issues of race and gender, it's why, Twitter as an anonymous medium, if you wish it to be so, is such a kind of cesspit of abuse, because no one knows who you are, so whereas I think with the discussions that we saw with the climate film, everyone does know who you are, so you just kind of, people are a bit more, I think that's the kind of where the considerateness comes out that you're talking about. So I'm not sure I would agree that anonymity would be a way forward, but what is useful, I think, definitely is there are interesting projects which are about and I think so. I love your project, Jacob. I just suggest that the particular topic that you're looking at is too tough a nut to crack. That would just be my suggestion. But if you're interested in the idea of getting people to see the other person's point of view, there are lots of topics which are not quite so red hot, and even the whole question of relationship between colonial states and former colonizers, say, so getting people to the other's point of view, there's interesting stuff that can be done, and I've always been fascinated by the idea that, for example, you could just the whole idea of persuading people to think slightly differently, and that you could maybe have some method of doing that. I haven't got very far with it, I'm afraid, because it's really difficult to persuade people to think differently, especially in the current climate where people are just becoming so polarized and so entrenched. One thing that I think has been established is, and I think this relates to your anonymity idea, if people have already said what they think, it becomes much harder to change them. So if you can somehow get them into discussing a topic without making them declare their point of view first, then it becomes easier to change. So in a sense, don't do what we did in the climate film, where we said, what would you vote? Would you vote social justice or technocratic or a combination? And then we said blah, blah, blah. And then we had the discussion. And I said, okay, you guys all said combination. Now explain yourselves. So in a sense, that's what you shouldn't do. Because then if you've said X and then there's a discussion, then it's much less likely that you are going to just smoothly move across to saying Y, because Albert does such a brilliant job of persuading you. You might, but because you are, helpless once Albert gets his discussion skills going. But it's going to be easier for Albert, correct me if I'm wrong, Albert, if you haven't declared your position to start with.
Yeah.
So no one knows, and especially in a classroom setting, no one knows what you think about X. You have your own opinion, but you haven't told anybody. It's much more likely that we'll persuade you across if you haven't said anything. Also, I think, Jocelyn's example was a genius example of that. That's exactly, I would say that might be the most effective example I've seen, because the whole thing of show white people what it's like to be black, that's something that people have tried again and again and again. But this privilege countdown thing, invented by some, formerly unknown woman in somewhere in Middle America, is brilliant way of doing it. I mean, there's another experiment involving VR, which sounds great, but is actually not as great as it seems. So the way it describes is, you put on a VR headset and you're in a computer-generated CGI space, like a computer game. You look around, you see a reflection of yourself, and you are black if you are in fact a white person, or you are white if you are in fact a black person, or if you're a mixed race person. I don't know what happens, but anyway. And then you move around in this skin of another person, and then they do various tests which are supposed to relate to empathy. And so empathy for the experience of another person, of a person of that race that you have just sort of pretended to be, or you just experienced being. And they found that it did increase empathy scores, that once people had that experience of being this other race, it encouraged people to see things from the other person's point of view. But before you get too excited about that, I talked directly to the guy who did the experiment, and he said, yeah, but just bear in mind that our test subjects are all liberal students.
Yeah.
So we're not going to, Mississippi and trying it on kind of redneck racist guys. We're we're dealing with kind of liberal young people to start with.
Yeah.
So okay, and the change is actually not that huge. So it sounds great, but it's not as great as it sounds potentially. Whereas I think Jocelyn's challenge, well, it would be interesting to know, Jocelyn. I mean, it's probably still a bit too soon, but at some stage it would be interesting to know, does that actually work on, does that work to do the sort of thing that Jacob is interested in doing? Does it work to change people's point of view? And I think it might well do. But I think the risk is, because the woman said that she wanted it to increase people's understanding of others, and people, which is great. But the risk always with that sort of thing is that people can spring back. People can go, "Oh God, yeah, your life is so difficult. Well, what about my life?" sort of thing. Yes, okay, I don't count those things, but there are all these other, that sort of stuff. But so fascinating, Jacob. I love the ambition. I just, maybe start with something just a little more. Does not, because part of the thing is that you're dealing with the fundamentals of religious experience and religious faith and ideas about which people feel there is no discussion to be had. And that you get into this kernel of undiscussability, and that's very tricky. Whereas other topics could be great. Okay, let's push on, because Jocelyn needs to astound us with her second idea.
It is not really an astonishing second idea, but on that note, it's basically vice versa of what Shaq said. I know a lot of Americans, and I've been in America quite often. And police brutality is something that I've experienced in my family myself. And it's basically an interactive training for Black young Americans, mainly males, because they get targeted more often, on how to behave when officers just want to do a regular check or in.
So exactly the idea I was discussing with a black guy in Florida about 2 months ago. Okay, keep going, Jocelyn.
It's basically a lot of things that I've learned in my childhood and that I've experienced in my childhood, and obviously read about in the news from the American side. So my dad was always the type of person to tell me, do not talk to the police. Whenever you get like stopped by the police, just ask if you can call someone. When I was a child, obviously, and it was in Switzerland, so it was different. And I never understood where he was coming from, and I was like, okay. And I basically later on figured out that my uncle, his brother, has died because of police brutality in Washington, D.C. So therefore, he was very cautious about how I interact with the police. He never said you have to. He always kind of said the policemen are not your friends, but you still have to be respectful and you still have to let them do their job, but just be careful. And I kind of want to. I was thinking of an idea on how to do an interactive film on how to behave, especially like I said before. As an education for Black children. It's sad that we have to do this, but unfortunately, that's the reality. And the police force in America isn't changing as fast as it should be at the moment. So, as an education for children to protect themselves instead of having the parents do that to them, because I've already seen a lot of videos on how parents have to teach their 5-year-old children on how to behave when they get approached by the police and how scared they are when they get approached by the police. But it would also be a good film to show white people and people that are not in the United States to see what you actually have to do and what your rights are, and that sometimes life isn't as easy for everyone just walking around and wanting to go to the grocery store, for example.
Great. So it's a fantastic idea. As I say, I had a conversation a couple of months ago with a African American guy who lives in Florida, and he saw Lifesaver or something, and we were talking about pretty much that idea, and I think the only thing that one problem we ran into obviously was the identity problem. So it was very clear that I could not write or direct such a film, but I was happy to be involved as some sort of advisor. So hopefully that sort of deals with that problem. The challenge was a little bit and I'm sure you could get around this, and I'm sure, I think it's a great idea. I mean, I wanted to do it myself. I think the challenge is you need to make sure that you don't imply that it's the fault of Black guys who do get killed because they did the wrong thing. I think that's the only risk. But it's not hard to, provided you handle it right, that can certainly be done. Because obviously the guy who murdered George Floyd did everything right. Once he was handcuffed, I mean, he was polite, he was respectful, he wasn't aggressive, and he was murdered. So I think, but so you just need like a kind of a health warning thing at the beginning, saying that this is what you should do, but this is still going to it's not a guarantee. But it's a great idea, and you know, you know, go and do it. I'm sure I'm delighted to help, you know, as an advisor or something if you want to do it. But I think, you know, I think it would be a great idea. Well, the idea of it also being like an educational thing for white kids is interesting. What you could do if you wanted to push that idea, which was given, in a sense, a whole different perspective on it, would be also to do a similar thing for white kids.
Yeah.
So you could have like a black kid. So you have like parallel, you know, like sliding doors. So you have like parallel things. You have a white kid who gets stopped by the same cop for doing the same thing as the black kid, and so then you can compare and contrast the attitude of the police officer, and so you could have an interestingly different sort of little sort of series of events and what happens if type thing if you're a white kid as opposed to a black kid. And then, you know, you could have even more detail again in terms of because obviously there's different kinds of white kid, you know, there's white kids who are sort of going home to nice homes, and there are white kids who, you know, are living on the streets, and they'll get treated very differently. So, you know, there's all sorts of dimensions you could add like that. But yeah, no, absolutely, great idea, and could be a learning experience for, you know, everybody in all sorts of ways. Yeah. Great, fantastic. Okay. Cool. All right. So, anything else we want to say about the political filmmaking? So, I think, just as you know, everything's political at the moment, and certainly one thing that I've found, once you hook into a cause, there's all these people who are crazy about it. You know, environmentalism. There's all these people who are like crazy about environmentalism compared with like, well, let's say the film that we'll be seeing at my next session. Next week you're with Cash talking about games, but then after that we've got like an action movie, which is, you know, yeah. And the thing about, you make an action movie and it's got a story, it's got a plot, it's exciting, there's all sorts of good things happening in it. No one gives a fuck. But if you're doing a film which relates to a cause that people believe in, you just get helpers just kind of like start coming out of the woodwork because people believe in it. So, you know, certainly, Jocelyn, your idea of a how-to thing about sort of dealing with the police, once you can deal with the issue of you're saying it was their fault if they got murdered, once you deal with that issue, which I'm sure you could, then I think you would suddenly just find all these winds just kind of blowing in the right direction for you, because that's something people want to see and they want to see made. I mean, Jacob, if you'll forgive me, I mean, I admire your fearless sort of honesty of thought in dealing with something which, but I think you would almost find the opposite, not because people don't care about the issue, but because they're just so scared of it. You know, that would, but if it's something different, if it's something about like building understanding between Muslims and non-Muslims in Europe, then fine, suddenly you're okay again. But then it'll be something where like people are going to like really try and avoid talking about cartoons because that's, you know, that's like a bit of a black pit that people aren't going to want to go into. Yeah. And then Albert, I mean, with the suicide, it's terribly sad, since I made the film that you'll be seeing in a few weeks, that you just keep on getting these people again and again. I've had people say, "Oh, it's an incredible film. My friend killed themselves 2 weeks ago," and ... or my brother killed themselves last year, and ... You know, suicide is a topic which, thankfully for most people, they don't have personal. It doesn't have personal relevance for them. But there is a small group of people for whom it is incredibly, incredibly personal, painful subject, and those people will want to help you make your film. And so, if that was something that you wanted to pursue, that you would, I think, definitely find this current of sort of helpers that just wanted it to be there. Jack, I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, people who back the police, there are plenty of people who back the police. Obviously, we're talking about the police in the UK, where, touch wood, there haven't been the same issues recently. I think if you're talking about the UK police in the 90s or 80s or something, it would be very different. But these days, I think they've cleaned up a lot. And so would...
I still think police may have cleaned up their act in the code internally, but I still think the public perception of the police is still a bit split, at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you compare it with. I mean, compared with the US, where they even the white people hate the police. I mean, everyone hates the police because they're just into their whole sort of kind of RoboCop thing. I mean, I remember, I remember a conversation I had incredibly in the 1980s with a young woman from Chicago. And I mentioned in passing, I have no idea why, that, a lot of English people, love the police. And she said, but that's incredible. People love the police. And this was a, blonde white girl from Chicago in the 1980s. Even then, the idea of people loving the police was, incredible to her, let alone now. But, again, because it's a real topic, you will find supporters for that idea in a way that if it's just an entertainment story, you don't have the same kind of sort of well, it depends. I mean, it depends how good the story is. Obviously, if it becomes Game of Thrones, then that's all different. But in terms of something that even though it's a small project, doesn't have a big budget, doesn't have any stars, but people still really want to happen. This kind of political, cause-driven filmmaking is really powerful tool, I think. So don't just bear it in mind, even at an early stage, because if you can make something powerful with it, then people really love it and love you. Yes. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So anything else? Are we good? Great. Okay. So next week you're going to be on Cash talking about the mad gay world of games, and then after that you're back with me, and we'll see if we can make Albert smile with some fast moving action. Yes. Shot in the slums of Jakarta. So also Jocelyn will be able to check our privilege as we watch. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, thanks very much, guys. If there's anything you want to follow up, just send us an email. Have a good time. See you soon. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.